Someone left me a comment asking what the age gap is between me and my stepbrother that molested me, and they went on to explain that the reason they were asking is because they have a 2-year age gap with their brother that abused them, and their parents say that a 2-year age gap means it doesn't count. I am not tagging the comment just for that person's privacy. I will answer that question about my experience, but I have some stuff I want to address before that. First, I am so sorry that your parents reacted that way. That is bullshit and it's gross, and responses like that can really add to the trauma. A huge part of what makes SA is a lack of consent, and children are not capable of consenting. So when children are touched in a sexual way, it is never consensual. Not always, but often one child is encouraging, initiating, starting this behavior, and the other is uncomfortable with it and doesn't know how to react, or doesn't feel like they have the power to leave or to say no or to protect themselves or defend themselves. And that may be very true. They may really not have the power to do that. But also sometimes, even if in a very literal sense, like they physically could have run, if their nervous system gets overwhelmed to the point that they don't realize they can flee and they instead freeze or fawn, then it doesn't change the fact that they didn't, in any practical sense, have any option of running away or of saying no. When you go into these types of trauma responses, part of your brain you have access to is limited. So you don't really have the self-control. It's your protective instincts take over. And any time that a child's nervous system takes over in a sexual scenario, they are being victimized. And age sometimes, maybe often, plays into this, but not at all in the way that your parents are suggesting. Age matters because power matters. Even with adults, there's a reason why therapists can't have sex with their clients, why doctors, policemen, etc., judges cannot sleep with their clients or their patients. And that is because, as a society, we recognize that when there is a power differential, the person with less power doesn't really have the full capacity to consent. And that's how age factors in. Is for adults, 2 years isn't a big deal. For children, 2 years is a big deal. If you have ever been around twins and the twins know which one is 2 minutes older than the other one, you will understand how much age usually factors into a sense of power difference with children. I imagine that if you ask anybody else you know who has a 2-year age gap with their sibling, no SA involved, just did you know that all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that you had less power than your big brother or your big sister? The answer is yes, of course. Children are very aware of age gaps, even if it is literally just a 12-month age gap. It matters to kids. I do believe that there can be exceptions to this. That can be gender-based. That can be something like being a biological child with a foster child. Maybe sometimes in those scenarios, the biological child is younger but has more power than the foster child. But as a general rule, older children are perceived as having more power. This can be significantly heightened in families that are patriarchal, because then the gender of a brother gives the brother even more power than if this were a 2-year age gap with a sister. And also in families that are authoritarian, where children have less power than parents. Because then that means the closer you get to adulthood, the more rights you get in authoritarian families. And I think a lot of families have authoritarian structures and don't fully recognize it, but authoritarianism is really any kind of family dynamic where the parents use force, fear, shame to control kids' behavior, rather than treating the children as small people with their own developmentally appropriate amount of authority, agency, autonomy. And actually in your comment where you say, my parents are saying that this doesn't count because that speaks to authoritarianism in and of itself to me, because what they are saying is they're older than you and they are the parents, and so their version of what counts matters more than you when you are the one who lived this. But that is not how reality works. Being older doesn't mean that you know more about somebody's personal experience than they do. I will answer the part about myself partly because I don't mind sharing, but partly because I think it also adds another point to this. I do have a big age gap with my brother. With this, I have several brothers, but with this particular one, I believe we are like 7 years and 3 months or something like that apart. Roughly 7 and 14, give or take a year probably. But I say that because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I had my stepfather attempt to invalidate me pretty significantly on this. We have only discussed this once. I shared my abuse with a psychiatrist when I was 14, so like 7 years after it had happened. I did not understand that because I was a child and because I was disclosing something of this gravity, that information would be shared with my parents. But it was, and so I had the terrible experience of just getting off the school bus one day and my stepdad is like red in the face and is coming at me with all of these questions that don't feel like questions, they feel like accusations, asking things like, well, you know how immature he is for his age, and you know, like, he's quite small for his age. You know, there's something wrong with him. I know that's not like politically correct, but something to that effect. There's something wrong with him, or he's not quite right, or something like that was said. I don't think he was ever diagnosed with anything, but he was always in special ed. Questions like, well, you guys are siblings, so weren't you playing doctor? This kind of nonsense. My thing is, people who want to invalidate you will try to do so regardless of the age gap. The age gap seems to be what your parents are focusing on here, but if it wasn't that, they would find something else. People don't like to believe survivors, especially in their own family. They don't want to think anybody that they are related to could be a perpetrator. People like to use age to like highlight how they can't be criminally charged or legally charged. And my response to that is, yes, absolutely. And I personally very much believe in that. I don't think that minors should be charged as adults. I think kids are kids and they should be kids legally. However, I do not think that a child not being able to be held criminally liable for something means anything about whether or not they traumatized another child. Whether or not they can go to jail or be sued means absolutely nothing about whether you were abused, whether you were traumatized. Your nervous system doesn't check in with the law or with the birth certificate of your perpetrator when determining how to internalize that traumatic memory. I hope this helps. You're not at all alone in this. Way too many people have similar experiences. Sometimes parents just genuinely do not understand how sexual trauma works. That being said, it doesn't change the fact that it's really harmful when parents respond like this, and it doesn't change the fact that you deserve better.